there with Adaptive Path, so we did not, Adaptive Path did not start as a strategic company. We were a web user experience firm. We were a design firm. But when clients would come to us to do design work, we often asked a lot of questions. And they didn't have answers to those questions. And so we had to then get those answers to those questions. And that was often through things like user research and prioritization exercises and other things. And we kind of backed into strategy because we realized that you couldn't do good design without having the strategy well articulated, or else you were just going to be throwing stuff against the wall and hoping that it sticks. 15 years later, a lot of people still throw stuff against the wall and hope that it sticks, and not everyone's learned that lesson. But again, this is kind of what I mean by accidental. That wasn't the goal. The goal was never to be a strategist. The goal is to put something out in the world, but it turns out in order to put good things out in the world, you need to step back and you need to have something of a strategic bent. We're going to hear from folks at Disney a little bit later. Actually my last project at Adaptive Path was for Disney, working on their website, their Disney Store site. And throughout our time at Adaptive Path, we did a lot with design principles and experience principles. And my favorite ones, it turned out, was the last ones I ever delivered at Adaptive Path. I was looking for others, but these were the ones that held up best. And you probably all are familiar with experience principles, right? A set of statements that you try to uphold as you kind of then execute on the design. And it's, for me, a key point of strategy, right? Because it helps bring a team together, it helps orient them, not just your team, in this case, if it was us and the client team, but also as you go from design to development, et cetera, you always check back on these principles to make sure that you're living up to them. So we had 6. Don't break the spell, which was basically like, it has to stay up, it can't be broken, no 404s, no weird errors, all those types of things. Deliver uncommon service and improve specialness. This was a key to the experience because they wanted Disney Store to feel more like Nordstrom's and less like Toys R Us. Distinct personality. This was something that I don't know. Often this isn't a principle that you get to do a lot of, but because it's Disney and they have all these amazing characters, you can kind of take advantage of those personalities and do something with them. And then finally, this came out of our research, we realized that people buying products on the Disney Store was not about buying the products, right? It's mostly moms, occasionally other like grandparents or aunts and uncles, et cetera, usually a relative buying it for a child. And they're not interested in the product, they're interested in a relationship that they have with this child that the product can help kind of manifest, right? And so kind of providing that fulfillment and connection between the people was important. One of the ways this bore out, I forgot to grab the screenshots from this and I apologize. But with this set of principles, we then went on and we did a bunch of ideation, and one of the concepts, one of the stories we ideated was around a grandmother who lives kind of far away from her grandchildren. Goes to a store, tries to find a product, doesn't know what to buy for her grandson, doesn't know what he likes, takes some pictures. We use the Disney website in order to have a back and forth between the grandmother and the mother. The mother says, you should buy this one. So the grandmother buys it, ships it to the mom to be delivered on Christmas. The insight that we were able to have around this kind of fulfillment and connection was that, it's kind of unfortunate the grandparents can't be with their grandchildren on Christmas Day when they're receiving their present. But we now have cameras in each of these gizmos and in all of our phones. So what we realized is, why don't, as part of the checkout process, allow the grandparent to record a video, branded video, that then there's a little short form URL that you can type in Christmas morning and you can be there, right? The grandparent can kind of be there Christmas morning whenever that present is open and wish the child Merry Christmas. This was one of those kind of goofy ideas that you develop in concept generation, but the client really loved it, and so we kept kind of designing for it and the client kept loving it, and then when they launched it a year and a half later, it was still there. They actually created the technology in order to support this connection because they realized how important it was. And I actually think these experience principles were key to making clear how important it was to again, not be about the product, but be about the connection between people. Another exercise that I've had a lot of success and happiness with, this actually doesn't come from Adaptive Path, this comes from the first company I was at after I left Adaptive Path called, the company was Inflection, and this was a product called Archives, is the design the box exercise. And this is kind of filling in for any of those kind of big team co-creation exercises. I find design the box to be a particularly powerful one, right? And that's the idea of if your thing that you're designing was in a box on a shelf, what does that box look like? And I find that this activity really is great for getting a lot of things that are buried in people's minds out of their heads. You break up into teams, so each team designs a box, so you have a set of conversations at that team level. And then you bring it all together and you have the whole team kind of have a set of conversations about these boxes. And then you have this physical artifact that is there, that you can't forget, that kind of manifests what it was you were thinking about. And the reason I'm pulling this one up is, you know, we were working on, archives.com was kind of like Ancestry, like a cheaper Ancestry.com. It was a family history site. And we had a project that we were launching we called it Super Awesome Family Tree. You can still see it on that box over there. And this idea was to create a really great family tree experience, which, frankly, there are none if you go to genealogy sites. They're all clunky and slow, and they're all using outdated technology. And it's like, wouldn't it be great if it kind of used the latest in web standards to take advantage of it? So we broke up and we did this box exercise, and something very interesting happened. I don't know if anyone recognizes it. Looking at these three boxes, what did we realize going through this process that we didn't know beforehand? Anyone want to take a guess, or is this, yes, Lynn? They do it in groups, okay. That's interesting, I hadn't thought of that. That's good, you do it in groups, so it's not an individual thing, right? It's a family thing. It's not what I was exactly getting at, but I like that. So you have an interpretation I didn't even have. Anyone else? Want to guess? Too early? There's no family fucking trees. There's a little one. There's a little one. We realized the family tree isn't the point. The family tree is a means to an end. That end is telling a story of your family. We have people together. We have this is a family and then all the generations behind them. You've got media. You've got the stories of coming over, whatever it is, right? That's what we realized through this exercise internally, is that it wasn't about the family tree, and that we got caught up in the name. We got caught up in this thing that every genealogy site has to have a family tree. It's like, oh, wait a moment. In fact, people hate family trees. I mean, you need to have them. They're table stakes when you do this stuff, but it's not about the family tree. And this exercise, for me, kind of allowed me to kind of shift my perspective on that, and everyone else on the team to like, oh, right, okay, we're telling stories here. Another tool that I've had success with, we at Adaptive Path called the Service Evolution Map, or Product Evolution Map. And it's kind of demonstrated. This isn't our diagram. This is the Spotify model for product development. We had one at Adaptive Path called the Cupcake model. I actually like this one better. But they're basically the same point, which is when you're building a car, don't kind of build it piece by piece, because no one wants a tire. No one wants a tire and a chassis, right? Build whole products that delight all the way through, right? And it's kind of fascinating to me how few people really still get this. You know, when you live in a world of, Paul was talking about Agile and backlogs and all this, it still gets very feature-oriented, and it's just like checking stuff off. We created at Adaptive Path, this is actually from Archives as well, though, we created this model of thinking about how do you stage experiences over time. So when I was at Archives, we wanted to deliver this smart family history, right, where you basically put in your name and it does all this auto-magical, understands, you know, through our data and other people's data, it can build your family history for you, create timelines and all this type of stuff. But that was this far distant future, so how are we going to get there, right? And so we were going to start with just making our current things stop sucking. Then we were going to create a tool. We decided the next easiest step was going to be around collaboration, kind of what Lynn was just talking about. Make it easier for people to work together, because it's actually really hard when you're building family histories to do it with others. People haven't cracked that nut. Or it's not really hard, it's just uncommon. And we thought, well, if you and a cousin are trying to build the same family tree, like maybe we should make it easier to work together. Then we wanted to make it possible for people to tell those stories. We thought the storytelling, those media aspects, was going to be another order of difficulty, so we'll get to that then. And then we'll have this super smart kind of AI, machine learning kind of family history experience. But the idea was each stage, it still feels complete, right? You don't feel like you're missing something. There's a holism to it. And for each stage, you identify what is the value to the user, what is the value to the business, and then only at the bottom do you do all the feature backlog stuff, right? The stuff that tends to get prioritized or tends to get considered first, we made it the thing that you considered last. And we basically grouped the enabling technologies and content by experience, right? So we might be able to launch a Maps integration tomorrow, but that's not going to fit with this model that we have. So let's wait on that and let's focus on the things that actually support the experiences we want to deliver. We use this type of model at Adaptive Path a bunch, and it was very helpful. Every client they want the last thing today, right? And so we were able to use tools like this to show them you can get to that last thing. We haven't forgotten about that last thing. We'll do some ideation around that last thing, but you need to recognize it's a process to get there. And we would give them documentation like this on whatever it was they were doing to ease them toward that glorious future. UX strategists, I think, get a little too caught up in user research as the primary means of understanding. We talk a lot about user-centered design. There's this whole thread, what is it? UX without user research is not UX, which is actually not a true statement. And I think we have to remind ourselves, like, it's not just about user research. User research is important, understanding your users is important, empathy is important, but it's not just about user research. I did a project for a South Korean company. If it weren't for giant South Korean companies, there would be no design firms left in San Francisco. So I had a couple of them. This was one. We were looking at the future of media. And key to what we ended up delivering, this is the whole process we engaged in. Key to what we ended up delivering was this trend map and trend forecasting. I'm going to build this whole thing out. Kind of this is how it all flowed together. Oops, did I just go too far? Damn, I always do that. So the trend forecasting isn't typical user research, right? It's secondary research. We looked at blogs and news articles, and we scoured university websites on what they were doing with kind of media and where media was going. We talked to experts, people who worked at YouTube, The Economist, Intel, people who live and breathe, researchers who live and breathe media. What do they think about it? We talked to what we called fringe users, people who kind of at the extreme of technology and media. We then did talk to quote-unquote normal folks and tried to understand their media behaviors, but that wasn't the only input. And key to this project, so where we ended up was, this was one of these, future vision projects, and we ended up with these 4 experience scenarios, but key to it was developing this trend map. And so I'm not going to go into super detail there. You can read it. But what we did is, as we took all the material from secondary research, expert interviews, and fringe user interviews, we then, sticky notes and a whiteboard, we drew kind of the map of what we saw that space. And we did it for each successive year. So at the top, we had a sticky note for every concept, then we grouped those concepts. So we had a big sticky note that kind of was the grouping of those concepts, and then the red whiteboard marker is just kind of notes around it, the story that envelops it. Then we would take a picture, then we tore it down, and then we put it back up, moved some stuff around, 2011. So we basically created this time series of what we thought media trends were going to evolve over time, and then we visualized it in this 6-foot-tall map. That I'm going to kind of blow up here, right? And we looked at these different areas: device, service, environment, content. Over time, the years ended up being not quite right. Futurism is one of my first stabs at futurism. It ended up being kind of like today, and then near, medium, far. Can't go into a lot of detail, don't have time, but the point here is to again, not only use user research as an input into your ideating and strategy, but think about where things are going. Try to understand, try to track it. You'll be wrong, but it will help you. It will inform those concepts that you're developing as you move forward. So then I leave Adaptive Path and I go in-house, and I try to explain how I approach design. And I realized, like, the way I think about design isn't the way that most other people think about design. Most other people think about design as execution, as delivery. And I'm like, but there's this whole, essentially, strategic component that design can inform. And so that's when I realized I needed a means that I could communicate design, the way I think about design, to others. And I ended up using the double diamond. This is kind of how it, I ended up manifesting it later in order to make it a little bit clearer. And again, the first diamond, definition. Strategy and plan, AKA building the right thing. On the right, execution. You know, working through the trade-offs to deliver the optimal solution, i.e. building the thing right. And you've got kind of ideation, generation, definition, requirements, iterative design, implementation, and kind of the role that design plays. On the left, design is helping make strategy concrete, kind of like I discussed with prototypes in the future. On the right, design does what most people think design does, the delivery of delightful experiences. One of the things I like about this, there's two things I like about the double diamond just on its own, from a strategy standpoint. One, it actually demonstrates that there is a whole kind of strategic component to design, that there's a set of questions that need to be answered before you go in. Most people, when they think of design work or UX work, they only think of the right diamond. So just by drawing that, people are like, oh, okay. Two, that idea of divergence and convergence, I think, is crucial and can kind of get overlooked. I think still, in my experience, most product development practice is very linear. You start with, it's just that line in the middle. You have an idea and you ship it, as opposed to the exploration and then the coming together and then further exploration and coming together. And I think just the nature of this drawing kind of has strategy inherent in it that I think is important for us to remember and to bring to others.